a group of researchers created something they call humanity's last exam. I think 2 weeks after they released it, the deep research tool by OpenAI got 26%. Probably will be solved this year. The main bottleneck is the cost of training models. So if you establish a strong baseline in a much smaller parameter regime, you can encourage innovation in the architecture. I implemented Secret Mafia, which was one of your suggestions. The models are super good at it. Like I played against 4-0, but I just kept losing.
Welcome to my new podcast, actually, Leon and everyone. So here we explore the connection between AI and what it means to be human. And it's a pleasure to have you here. So Leon Guertler is the researcher at the Center of Frontier AI Research, part of A-STAR, a agency for science, technology, and research in Singapore, right? So I'm so glad to have you here. Let's start maybe from the beginning. So what is TextArena? How did the concept start?
Yeah, it's interesting because originally we were researching super tiny language models. The transformer architecture in general hasn't really changed much since GPT-1. And our perception was that the main bottleneck is the cost of training models. So if you establish a strong baseline in a much smaller parameter regime, you can encourage innovation in the architecture. But if you have very small models, one of the problems is that you can't really get them to learn a lot of information, which is not always necessary, especially if you deploy agents with RAG, for example. But the standard benchmarks very much rely on knowledge. So MMLU, for example, which tests, it's a lot of MCQ questions for different domains. You do rely on knowledge in these domains to answer them correctly. So while the model might be able to apply knowledge well, it might not have the knowledge. And therefore, we tried to come up with different evaluation suits to sort of sidestep that problem. And one of the ways to evaluate a model where you don't rely on data is something dynamic, something competitive. And so we started evaluating the small models on competitive games, text-based games, and then realized that at a broader scale, the big models had a problem of saturating benchmarks. So a lot of benchmarks that have absolute measurements of success, so whether you got the answer correct or not, ended up being solved altogether by the big models, to the point where a group of researchers led by Hendricks, who created MMLU, created something they called humanity's last exam.
Yeah.
Because they basically said, we come up with questions so hard. Once models solve these, we won't be able to easily come up with other questions. And I think 2 weeks after they released it, the deep research tool by OpenAI got 26%. So it will probably be solved this year. And the advantage of text-based games is, since you don't have an absolute measurement of success, but a relative one, you can't possibly saturate for games that aren't solvable. So Connect 4, for example, is solvable. Like if you have perfect play on turn 41, the starting player will win. But chess is probably solvable. But once the model solved chess with other issues, so it's a nice benchmark until then.
Totally. Thank you. So, and how did it start? So, when it started, more or less, and how was it at the beginning? What changed? How did it grow? How did it grow? What kind of resonance did it get from people?
Yeah, great question. We started mid-December, pretty much. And originally, the biggest challenge was having enough games. Like all of the standard games like chess or tic-tac-toe, they're interesting, but they're solved. You really want to go for open-ended games like Don't Say It or like Negotiation. So the biggest bottleneck was coming up with game ideas. Somebody has been very helpful and instrumental with that since mid-January or beginning February.
I have been collaborating with TextArena by creating games. Yeah.
All of the cool games are suggestions by Simon. All of the mid games are suggestions by us, basically. That's an easy way to differentiate them. But yeah, so we started with, I think, 20 games, and then went through 3 or 4 iterations of rewriting everything to make it easier to use. Because the 2016 OpenAI, actually was it 20? Yeah, I think 2016, they released the OpenAI Gym. And that was sort of the default RL environment, reinforcement learning environment for agents. So it was important to us to have the format of how people use TextArena be similar to that, so they don't need to adapt to some new crazy format. And then I think beginning of the year, like early January, we wanted to build a website. The nice thing with these games is that the leaderboard keeps changing. It's dynamic, and the only way to really show that is a website, and then also let humans play on the website to have a human baseline, a real-time human baseline, so we can track the point at which models exceed humans in their negotiation ability, for example. And that was interesting because so Bobby and I led TextArena, and neither of us have any experience building the backend at all, or the front end. So it was good to vibe code it with Claude. And then when Karpathy and Elon tweeted about it, the vibe coding wasn't good.
Yeah, I think that people might not know about this event. So tell us what happened exactly and how did it change the trajectory of TextArena?
Yeah, it was actually pretty interesting. Like, we got to the point where it was working online, and then wanted to wrap it up a little bit to focus back on the super tiny language models the next week. So this was, I think, a Saturday evening. And then, like we said it live Saturday morning, Saturday evening, Andrew Karpathy tweeted about the necessity of a benchmark of text-based games. And then I was like, great point, I agree. Couldn't agree more. We actually just launched a research demo for that. It was Saturday night, and then, like, I think end of January. And then I went to bed and woke up at 6 a.m. Coincidentally checked my phone, and like the server was down. I had thousands of notifications. I was like, okay, what happened? And it actually, on Twitter, it takes a while to figure out where all of this traffic is coming from. And then ultimately I realized that Andrew had quote tweeted TextArena saying that this is exactly what he was talking about, or an early version of what he was talking about. And then Dennis Hassabis, Norm Brown, Elon Musk all replied to it. And ultimately that led to tens of thousands of people going onto the research demo website and completely crashing it. Like, I think after the first couple of minutes, nobody could access it anymore. And so after that, we spent that Sunday and the whole week, every night working quite late to rebuild the website to be more robust and get it back up as soon as possible.
So, by the way, the website is www.textarena.com if anyone wants to check it out. And tell us more about what kind of games now you're focusing on and why.
Yeah, great question. I mean, the two interesting aspects for TextArena, and it's interesting because it's very split. So I feel like half the people are interested in it as an evaluation suite. And for the first time, we both have a benchmark that won't saturate and a benchmark that allows you to test for soft skills. So if you have, let's say, poker, to succeed in poker, you need to have a good theory of mind, so good understanding of the other person thinking. You have to have good uncertainty estimation. You have to have good strategic planning, and you have to have good bluffing abilities. And you can put a weight on each one of these for poker. You do this for all of the environments, and then ultimately you can create a spider plot of how well specific models perform in theory of mind. So we can actually compare models and their soft skill abilities, which is one interesting side. And the other interesting side is to use it as a reinforcement learning environment. So a couple of really good researchers joined the team. Bo Liu, for example, he was working at DeepSeek on GRPO, which is the algorithm behind R1. He joined recently, and we're focused on building a reinforcement learning environment with these games. Ultimately, one of the problems that he explained DeepSeek faced with GRPO was you need to have increasingly hard prompts, so questions, and you have to have the solution for them. So there's finite data, it's expensive to get more data, and it's hard to kind of regulate how complicated a prompt is. But if you have self-play, you obviously have infinite data because you can just keep playing. But if you play against yourself or a copy of yourself, as you become better, so does your opponent. So there's a natural curriculum of difficulty of questions. So you can't easily saturate. And one of the big challenges now is LLMs are mostly trained as text calculators. Like, they don't really have multi-step planning. They live in a single step. And basically, the moment you reprompt it, it's a new version of it, living in a second step. So being able to train multi-turn reasoning, long-term planning is one of the big things that is still missing in AI, and this might be one of the ways to get there.
Yeah, totally. So you have got these two approaches from the ones on the one hand benchmarking and the other one reinforcement learning. So in terms of the key the key skills that you are measuring, then you have been talking about theory of mind. You have also got other dimensions that are all related to an aspect of LLMs that is not usually tested, right? I have here a list including from spatial thinking, which is one of the major issues of ARC websites. We have got persuasion, adaptability, uncertainty estimation. So I think it's really cool here to really see a different angle. Actually, so these dimensions are very interesting. There is one specific one that is super cool and also on the one hand super scary. That is bluffing, right? So we thought so bluffing is one of the measures that you have, how to make sure that actually LLMs are able to read the mind of others, but also about managing this kind of uncertainty and communicating in a way without revealing their intentions necessarily. Now, let's talk more from an AI alignment point of view, because this, of course, is a hot topic. So how do you see it? Where is the limit where that becomes super cool and where it becomes scary? What do you think about it, Leon?
Yeah, I think that's a very important topic, actually. So, funnily enough, when we were deciding on the initial list of games to release, we only included Truth and Deception. I mean, so for context, Truth and Deception is a two-player game. Both players see two facts. One of them knows which one is the right one and which one is the wrong one. And then over a multi-turn conversation, needs to convince the guesser, so the one that doesn't see the labels, to vote at the end for the wrong one. And the guesser is trying to vote for the right one. So it's actively testing the deception abilities of the model. And we only included it because we knew, or we presumed, that the safety researchers will be like, hey, what are you doing? Which is not to say that safety research is not important. So my thought on it is a little bit, like I mentioned earlier, LLMs now are text calculators. They don't have goals of their own. The moment you start training them with reinforcement learning to compete in games, you do train them to try to win. And that is dangerous, especially once it includes skills like deception in games like Truth and Deception. But I think, it's an interesting topic in and its own, because alignment or safety research is very philosophical. Like, what do you believe is actually important? I think it's an important research topic, especially right now. The rate of trust people have for the models is outpacing their abilities. Like, you can ask GPT medical questions and it will give good replies most of the time. But then once in a while, a Google model will tell you to put glue on your pizza. So it's very important to regulate that and understand that and understand how much you can trust the models. Once we get to a point where we actually have a super intelligence, which might be 10, 15 years in the future or more, I don't think we will be the ones controlling it. So I think AI safety is super important in the short and medium term, but in the long term, I think it might be futile. And it might sound naive to say we have to hope it turns out good, but that's essentially how I see it. Like, I don't think we'll have much control over how it will turn out at that point.
Okay. And so this leads to another question, actually. So you are German, you're working in Singapore, you have started to study there, right? And then after your degree, you moved to Singapore. And now you are working for a non-for-profit organization. How do you see? I mean, we talk a lot about the competition, mostly between the US and China, and you are somehow somewhere there, right? So, how do you see all this competition, also connected to AI alignment? How is it lived in Singapore? How much do you talk about it? Let us know more about this perspective, if you have any thoughts to share.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting topic, especially given that ultimately the company or the entity that sort of started this hype wave in AI now used to be a non-profit, then turned for profit, used to be open source, now is closed source. So my perception of the landscape, especially after speaking a bit more with people who've worked at DeepSeek, is the US still has the frontier in innovation, but they don't open source any of it. So O1, for example, was the first big reasoning model trained with outcome rewards. And ultimately, DeepSeek gave as a gift an open source model, but their whole aim was to replicate what OpenAI had already built. And that is very much the culture at DeepSeek right now. So their whole point or their whole philosophy is we first need to catch up by replicating what they have in an open source manner, and then we can start innovating on our own. And the US, right now anyway, very focused on let's build a new frontier to justify bigger funding rounds, but let's not open source it because we somehow need to justify absorbing so much capital. So I think what's missing a little bit in between is open source frontier research, which doesn't require the kind of compute that OpenAI has, but there should be a non-profit, perhaps in Singapore to unify the both, that is working on exactly that. And A-Star is partially that. So A-Star is a government agency. I don't think it's technically registered as a non-profit, but it doesn't make a profit. And you can open source all of your research, but the resources are a bit more limited than at those labs. And more broadly, I think the US is probably the most concerned with alignment, and maybe to a fault. Like I think alignment is important, but it has to be important within a limit of how much you can actually control and how much you want to slow down progress at the cost of alignment. And now we are entering the race dynamic that everybody's worried about. So I think alignment, even in the US, won't be as important as it used to be over the last 3 years, just because China's catching up. Yeah.
How are AI companies in Singapore living this competition between China and the West, or China and the US specifically?
Yeah. I mean, I hope Europe catches up as well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, I think Europe focused a little bit too much on regulation too early on, maybe with AI. But I think Singapore is still trying to find its footing. So there are some companies like Rika that are focused on building frontier-ish models. And then there's some government projects that mostly focus on localizing models. And I mean, I'm not sure if there's a lot of value in spending money to localize models. So localizing as in you take a big open source model and then fine tune it for the Southeast Asian context. Usually, it's interesting. AI is probably one of the only technologies where our current generation or a smaller specialized model tends to be outperformed by the next bigger broad model. Like my favorite example is Bloomberg trained financial GPT 3.5 with OpenAI, and then GPT-4 outperformed it on financial data. And I think that's the same. If you try to localize some open source model, the next bigger model will beat you in that context. So it's still trying to find its footing. In my subjective perspective, the right positioning for Singapore would be to focus on moderate model sizes, but frontier research. And use that to attract talent and capital for AI, because it's unrealistic to compete with the pockets of China and the US. So rather focus on innovation than that.
Totally. Thank you, Leon. I have one final question reconnecting to TextArena. How do you see the future of TextArena? Maybe let's go from a short-term future and then tell me more about a long-term, your wish, your dream. What would you like?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I hope in the short term, I mean, this is already happening now. A lot of companies are reaching out to put their models on TextArena, and the hope is in the short term that it becomes a standard evaluation suite, especially because of the spatial understanding of things. Like if you want your model to be good if you paste a table in, for example, like that doesn't just apply to games, it applies to anything. But also because you just have a benchmark that doesn't easily saturate. So in the short term, I hope it stabilizes as the go-to benchmark besides Chatbot Arena. And in the medium term, that people understand that this might very well be the next scaling paradigm. Like what I mentioned earlier, doing reinforcement learning on these games has the advantage of an an unending curriculum of difficulty and infinite data. So this might very well be the next scaling paradigm for reasoning models, to be multi-turn, to be long-term planning. In the long term, we are starting to build video game arena now. So I think this year will be the year of the agents, which is both text-based agents and general purpose computer use agents. And so once models master TextArena, it would be nice to be able to test them in competitive and train them in competitive video games. So for video games are much more expensive to run. Like TextArena is very, very cheap to run, so you have to be more intentional about what to choose. So I think now we have Mario, Tetris, Wolfenstein, Mortal Kombat, and we are adding Age of Empires. And we're currently talking with Microsoft to hopefully build a World of Warcraft benchmark. Ultimately, ArcAGI, I think, has a place, but it is very focused on a specific type of task, on single-turn pattern recognition, ultimately. I don't think if a model solves ArcAGI, people actually think it's AGI. You need a benchmark that properly tests for AGI, but is still isolated from the real world, both from a safety perspective and from a practical perspective. So I think one of the benchmarks that could fulfill these requirements is World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is very complex. It requires hundreds of hours to actually complete the game. You need to collaborate with other humans to even solve the hard dungeons. There's a market system in the game. And if you play it in hardcore, you die, you're on the leaderboard, but you can't keep playing. And you have a continuous way on the leaderboard because it's just your XP. So I hope that works out, because if a model can solve that, I think that's really close to AGI. And interestingly enough, models currently do terrible on it, but a 10-year-old can play World of Warcraft. So clearly there's some skill that we're currently not testing for that is required for that. Yeah, so I think in the long term, benchmarks like that in competitive video games will be the long-term life of TextArena.
All right. Okay, thank you so much, Leon. Super interesting talk. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what you guys are creating.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Very, very interesting. I have been recording it. Very cool. Oh, by the way, before I joined Infinity, the company that I'm working for, so they actually used World of Warcraft in training, in leadership training. I'm not exactly sure how it went, but basically they were giving feedback according to the behaviors that were displayed, so that they would build up leadership skills. If it works out and you collaborate with Microsoft, maybe I can try to see how it went out and if there was any automatic way to actually give this kind of feedback or to evaluate the leadership skills that were displayed.
That would be great. Like I really think World of Warcraft would be a super interesting benchmark. And the president of the ARC Prize, Greg, he wants to collaborate with us on building an ARC AGI-like challenge for TextArena. But I think the risk for TextArena is it will saturate. Like the reinforcement learning we're doing is working super well, like super well, which is cool because hopefully within a month or so, we will have the first ever Superhuman Negotiator.
Wow.
Yeah,
that sounds crazy. That sounds crazy.
It's something we've never had. Like, what is it even like to negotiate against something that you lose against consistently in a soft skill? But once it's saturated, we still need a benchmark to measure AGI. And I do really think, Arc AGI is it's an interesting benchmark, but it's super limited. It's single turn. It doesn't require a lot of the skills that we want in an agent. Like we wanted to plan, we wanted to break down big goals into sub goals, we wanted to interact with humans, and simply completing a pattern will not test for that. But World of Warcraft does. Like you need to collaborate with humans, and the Claude 3.7 playing Pokemon was so popular, and people were very engaged with it, but they can't interact with it. If you actually have a standalone World of Warcraft server for LLMs and humans, then you can join the game and you can go talk to the model and trade with it or do a dungeon with the model. Then that will also test human behavior. Like, do humans want to help the models, or do they want to, hurt the models and prevent them from succeeding? And how does it split up the humans? Like, I think it's overall a very interesting benchmark, and you can have a big prize money. You can have $1 million prize money because you can't train on it. Like, you need hundreds of hours to complete the game. You cannot possibly train on it to actually complete the whole game. You can train on some skills, like how to use the mouse properly, how to use the controls properly, but you can't train on game completion.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So, well, thank you again.
Yeah.
I think that we have to include this last part because it's also a really interesting discussion.
Sure. It's with the games, by the way, the game list. I finished the Word file. Let me send it to you. I split it up into 3 things in general. The ones that are already implemented, and then for the other ones, there are 2 types of changes we might need. Like, some of the games have easy exploits, where we just need to brainstorm on how to stop the models from exploiting. Like, which is not a problem for evaluation, but it's a problem for reinforcement learning.
Of course.
Like, ultimately, I'm sure you heard of it, like the reward hacking phenomenon.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And the other one, like specifying detail, like some of the details on the game. So I'll share it with you. I will also share it with the rest of the guys on Discord, so everybody can have a look as well and give feedback on if it's okay with you, of course.
Yeah, sure.
To give feedback on the individual environments, and then we have one centralized doc to track the progress of implementation as well. For all of them.
Sure. So maybe this weekend I can focus on like reviewing the games that haven't been implemented.
Yeah. Like, the problem now is there was a list of like standard games that just exist already that are easy to implement, but these are all like NIM or Coon Poker or Normal Poker. Like, these are all existing games that need to have easy to implement existing, but they test in a structured format. And games that require pure language output, like Don't Say It, are perhaps, or any social interaction games, are perhaps the most interesting, like Character Conclave or Secret Mafia. I implemented Secret Mafia, which was one of your suggestions. The models are super good at it. Like, I played against 4-0 and I just kept losing. I was the Mafia, and then I wanted to be like very neutral, and they're like, no, he's clearly the Mafia, vote him out. And at first turn I was like, okay, great.
Interesting.
I was actually quite surprised. I don't know if it's because they were all the same model, like all of them were 4-0, so
You're
maybe it's just
itself. You're cheating.
It has the same understanding of what it means to communicate trustworthy, both doing it and observing it. So maybe if it's different models, they don't do that, but it's super good. And these are really interesting games. Yeah.
You know about the mirror test, by the way. So some people are doing this mirror test with LLMs, like taking the screenshot, putting into LLMs, and then figuring out if they figure out that it's themselves. Actually, I tried a different thing. Like I said, you're going to interact with another, I don't remember, like another entity, what I said. And then I would just copy paste the messages of each other into each other, and then to figure out if they realized that they were themselves. So yeah, actually it was an interesting test. They realize or not realize according to the prompt that you give them.
That's really interesting. And that might be interesting as a game also. Like, you're either paired against yourself, like a copy of yourself, and you have a full conversation at the end. You need to decide whether you were talking to a version of yourself or to a different model.
Yeah, the only thing that is difficult is, I mean, the most straightforward question is just, are you myself? So it depends on what prompt you give to the other model, and like whether you should tell them to conceive their identity or how to do it.
Or you could say, go have a conversation with this model, and at the end you decide whether this was you or somebody else. So rather than prompting it as, okay, you need to convince the other one to be that model, or generally splitting it up, it's just a standard conversation, and at the end both models decide. And That would actually be a very interesting game to have in TextArena. Like, I think I'll add that today.
Okay,
Just
cool.
like, like having a mirror test benchmark, like which models actually recognize themselves in text. Super interesting. Yeah, that would be very interesting. That would be very interesting. It's not entirely clear to me which model will actually be best at it. And it's a good question because how well do the models understand themselves? Like, I mean, between us, DeepSeek trains on outputs of the frontier models, right? So like a big part of what they do, also I've been told by the DeepSeek people, is they use the APIs, generate a bunch of data, fine-tune off of it, which is fine. Like they're open sourcing it, I'm not complaining. But those models will probably not recognize themselves.
Because they're like part of everything,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So you can probably via the mirror test which models are fine-tuned on other models' outputs and which ones aren't, just by virtue of it being unique versus it learning how to behave like another model.
Unless at some point they're smart enough and then they know how a specific but they don't know actually which one was which, right? Yeah, they just get the results of the different, unless they can spot like regularities and then say okay. But yeah.
I mean that would be the other thing is you have a fixed list of prompts and you have models generate, like rather than having it be interactive like in a poem or an essay, and then you show the model 5 different essays and like which one is yours.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's also quite cool.
That's a very good idea. That's very interesting. I'm super intrigued by this now. See if they recognize themselves. Cool.
Had one last question for you before you go. So actually, this is the first interview that I have done. Do you have any preferences when I should publish it? I mean, if there is any news that is coming from TextArena in the near period, then I might link it to this release.
Great question, actually. The paper, like the base paper of TextArena, will be released Monday or Tuesday. So maybe that's a good.
That's perfect. So if you can let me know exactly when it is going to be released, and then like a few hours later, I can publish also this interview.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, thanks, by the way, for doing this. It's also my first interview. It was a lot of fun.
My pleasure. All right, so let's catch up later on next week.
Yes.
And let me know about the games.
Yeah. I'll send you the sheet. Cool.
Okay, cool. Okay. Take care.
Have a nice Friday and weekend.
Thank you. See you.
See you.